April 1945, a muddy prisoner of war camp sits outside Munich. The air is cold. Smoke hangs low over the barbed wire. Inside the wire, 200 men from the 116th Panzer Division stand in a rigid line. Their uniforms are worn but clean. Their chins are high. An American mess sergeant places a tray of hot rations on a folding table. Beef hash, white bread, canned fruit. It is more than most Germans have seen in years. Corporal Friedrich Hartmann looks at the steaming food. He does not reach for it. He spits on the dirt. He declares the food is for dogs, not for soldiers of the Reich. Behind him, 200 men refuse to move. They believe their pride is a weapon. They are wrong. General George S. Patton is coming. He is about to show them what pride is worth when the stomach begins to scream. This is the story of how General George S. Patton dealt with 200 arrogant German prisoners who decided they were too good for standard American rations. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We tell the World War II stories that show what happened when old hierarchies met new realities in the final days of the Great Conflict. Patrick Donnelly was 33 years old. He came from the gray, industrial streets of Cleveland, Ohio. He served with the 3rd Army's Quartermaster Corps. Before the war, Donnelly had been a line cook in a bustling hotel kitchen. He enlisted because he believed a man should be useful when the world caught fire. He had already lost a younger brother to a German mortar at Anzio. He sent every spare cent of his pay home to his widowed mother. For 6 months, Donnelly had managed the grimy chaos of POW kitchens across Europe. He had seen the true face of human hunger. He vividly remembered the liberation of a small camp near the French border. He watched skeletal men weep over a single slice of standard white bread. He saw them kiss the greasy hands of the American soldiers who handed out the rations. To Donnelly, food was life. It was a fundamental mercy. He took his job seriously because he knew the exact distance between a full belly and a slow, agonizing death. Now, he stood before a row of prisoners who looked at his hard work with open, sneering contempt. Friedrich Hartmann was 29. He was a corporal in the 116th Panzer Division, the famous Windhund unit. He came from a line of minor Prussian nobility near Potsdam. Hartmann believed in the inherent biological superiority of the German soldier. Even in the middle of a muddy camp, his tall leather boots remained polished to a deep mirror shine. His wool tunic was perfectly tailored to his lean frame. He wore his Iron Cross second class like a holy relic. To Hartmann, the defeat of the Reich was a temporary indignity. He viewed the American captors as uncultured peasants who happened to have too many trucks. He told his men that accepting these rations was a total surrender of their Teutonic souls. He believed that maintaining strict military standards was the only way to keep their identity intact. He led his unit in loud, defiant marching songs that shook the barracks walls. He wanted the Americans to know that though they held the keys, they did not hold the spirit of the men inside. The month was April 1945. The Third Reich was a shattered shell. American tanks rolled through the heart of Bavaria. The front lines moved 50 miles in a single day. Behind the steel, the administration of war struggled to keep pace. Thousands of German soldiers surrendered every hour. They came out of the woods and the ruins with their hands behind their heads. The American army had to house them. They had to guard them. Most importantly, they had to feed them. The logistics were a nightmare. Supply trucks moved through cratered roads and blown bridges. Fuel was scarce. Canned meat and hard crackers were precious commodities. Outside the wire of the camp, the world was dying. In the streets of nearby Munich, German civilians dug through frozen dirt for old potatoes. Mothers walked miles for a cup of watered milk. The war had consumed everything, yet inside the camps, a strange dynamic took hold. Some American officers were tired. They were soft. They wanted to avoid trouble as the war ended. They let the German officers keep their batons. They let the non-commissioned officers run the barracks, like it was still 1940. They ignored the small acts of defiance. They looked away when the prisoners refused to work or complained about the menu. They thought it was better to keep the peace than to enforce the reality of defeat. This leniency fed the fire of Hartmann's ego. He saw the American patience as a sign of weakness. He believed his captors were afraid of his rank. Staff Sergeant Donnelly stood in the mud and watched the steam rise from the trays. He saw the hungry eyes of the younger prisoners behind Hartmann. He knew this would not end with a polite request. Donnelly walked to the front of the line. The mud pulled at his boots. He held a metal ladle. The smell of the beef hash was thick in the cold air. He looked at Hartman. The German stood like a statue. The iron cross on his chest caught the dull light. "The food is hot, Corporal. Move your men through," Donnelly said. "We do not eat this," Hartman said. "It is the same ration every man in this camp gets. It is the same ration I eat," Donnelly said. "That is your misfortune," Hartman said. "There is beef in this. There is bread. It is better than what you had in the woods last week," Donnelly said. "In the woods, we were free. Here, we are still German soldiers. We do not eat slop from a bucket," Hartman said. "This isn't slop. It's army issue. Take the tray," Donnelly said. "No," Hartman said. "If you don't eat, you don't work." "If you don't work, there are consequences," Donnelly said. "Your threats are as empty as your culture," Hartman said. "People are dying of hunger 10 miles from here. You are being handed a gift. Don't be a fool," Donnelly said. "A gift? You offer us the scraps of your excess. It is an insult to our rank. It is an insult to our blood," Hartman said. "I am a mess sergeant, not a politician. Eat or step back," Donnelly said. "We will step back. We will stand here and sing. We will show you that a German stomach is governed by his will, not by his hunger," Hartman said. "You're going to starve your own men for a point of pride?" Donnelly asked. "Pride is all we have left. We will not be fed like animals by a nation of shopkeepers," Hartman said. "I'm telling you for the last time, take the food," Donnelly said. "Save it for the subhumans in the streets. We are the Windhund. We do not bow to the kitchen," Hartman said. Hartman turned his back. He barked an order. 200 men snapped to attention. They did not look at the steaming trays. They looked at the gray sky. They looked at the wire. Then they began to sing. The sound was deep and rhythmic. It was a marching song of the Wehrmacht. It was the sound of a dead empire trying to breathe. It drowned out the sound of the idling trucks. Donnelly felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Bavarian wind. He saw the arrogance in Hartman's eyes. It was a fever. It was a sickness that a ladle of hash could not cure. Donnelly put the ladle back in the pot. He wiped his hands on his apron. He walked away from the wire. He went straight to the command tent. He told the captain. The captain looked at the report. He looked at the singing prisoners. He saw the line of men refusing the mercy of a meal. He picked up the field telephone. He did not call the colonel. He called the headquarters of the Third Army. The report reached Patton within the hour. The singing stopped before the jeep even cleared the gate. Patton didn't need a siren. He had the 4 stars on his helmet and the ivory-handled revolvers glinting at his hips. He stepped out of the vehicle with a slow, practiced grace. Every American snapped to attention. The Germans grew silent. The air grew heavy. Patton walked straight to Hartman. He didn't look at the other 200 men. He looked only at the polished boots and the iron cross. "Is this the man?" Patton asked. "Yes, sir," Donnelly said. Patton turned to Hartman. "I am told you find American food offensive. Is that correct?" "It is beneath the dignity of my men," Hartman said. "You believe your rank entitles you to a different menu than the one provided by the United States Army." "We are soldiers, not beggars," Hartman replied. "And you have ordered these men to refuse sustenance until your standards are met?" "I have," Hartman said. Patton stood inches from Hartman's face. He spoke in a low, cold rasp. "You talk of dignity while standing in a cage. You believe that by refusing a meal you are maintaining a legacy. You think your pride is a shield. It is not. It is a noose. 10 miles from here, German women are boiling grass to keep their children alive. They would crawl through glass for the bread you just insulted. They have lost everything because men like you believed you were born to rule the world. Sergeant Donnelly here lost his brother to your mortars. He works a hot stove to ensure you do not rot. He offers you life, and you spit on it because the packaging isn't decorative enough for your Prussian soul. Respect is not something you demand from a position of defeat. Respect is earned by recognizing the reality of the dirt beneath your feet. You are not a conqueror. You are a guest of the American taxpayer. Here is your choice. You will order your men to eat, or I will withhold all rations from this unit for 72 hours. The rest of this camp will eat 3 times a day right in front of you. You will watch them. You will smell the meat. You will find out exactly how much your identity weighs when your belly begins to eat itself. Respect doesn't fill a stomach, Corporal. Eat now, or starve for your pride." Decide Hartman did not speak. He did not move. He stared straight ahead, his jaw set in a hard, pale line. He chose the silence of the martyr. Patton did not wait for a second answer. He turned on his heel and walked back to his jeep. The order was already given. The 72-hour clock began at sunset. Staff Sergeant Donnelly followed the general's order to the letter. Every morning, noon and night, the mess crews rolled the heavy steel steam tables out into the central courtyard. The 200 men of the 116th Panzer were marched to a small, fenced enclosure directly adjacent to the main kitchen. They were ordered to stand at attention. They were ordered to watch. 10 yards away, the rest of the camp's 3,000 prisoners sat at long wooden tables. They ate thick beef stew. They tore into soft white bread. The heavy, savory scent of hot fat and boiled potatoes drifted over the wire on the damp Bavarian wind. It was a physical assault. Hartman stood at the front of his line. By the second day, his polished boots were coated in gray mud. The sharp, arrogant line of his jaw had become a ragged edge of stubble. His men were no longer singing. They were staring. Their eyes followed every spoonful of food that entered another man's mouth with a desperate, animal intensity. The sound of clinking metal against tin trays was louder than any artillery barrage they had ever survived. By the third day, the rigid Prussian posture collapsed. Men slumped against each other. Some wept without sound. Hartman looked at the steam rising from the nearby pots and saw the truth Patton had promised. The pride of the Windhund had evaporated, replaced by the primal, hollow ache of 1,000 missed meals. Patrick Donnelly returned to Cleveland in 1946. He went back to the hotel kitchens and stayed there for 40 years. He was a man of heavy portions and a deep hatred of wasted food. He died in 1987 at the age of 75. His children found a small, rusted tin in his old army footlocker. Inside was a single, rock-hard piece of German field bread. He kept it for 4 decades to remind himself that hunger is the only real master. Friedrich Hartmann was released in 1948. He returned to a Potsdam that was a pile of blackened bricks. His family title meant nothing in the new world. He spent 30 years working as a night watchman in a cold warehouse. He never wore his Iron Cross again. He lived in a one-room apartment and kept a pantry stocked to the ceiling with canned goods. He died in 1992. His neighbors said he never looked at a simple crust of bread without a flicker of fear in his eyes. General Patton never mentioned the standoff in his official memoirs, Sid. He kept a brief, handwritten note in his private files about the 116th Panzer. He wrote that some men must be reminded they are made of meat and bone before they can understand the reality of defeat. He believed the stomach was the shortest path to a man's humility. He knew that pride was a luxury the dead could not afford. Some historians argue that Patton's decision to withhold rations was a clear violation of international standards and an act of unnecessary cruelty against men who were already defeated. They suggest that such tactics did little to help reconstruction and only served to deepen the resentment of the local population. Others argue that Patton's response was a vital psychological blow against the lingering arrogance of a broken military hierarchy. They maintain that by forcing the prisoners to face the physical reality of their situation, he prevented further insurrections within the camps. What is certain is that the standoff ended without a single shot being fired, and the prisoners of the 116th Panzer never refused a meal again for the duration of the war. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have withheld those rations to break their pride, or would you have found a softer way to handle their defiance? Let us know in the comments. If you want more stories about what happened when old hierarchies met new realities, make sure to subscribe. Sergeant Donnelly never forgot the look on their faces when the hunger finally won.